had an amazing career in public service, and
Thank you.
You have been able to change the lives of many people with your work. So how was that? How was that transition from working in corporate to then getting into public service and becoming the first Latino to be the Secretary of State? Like, that's huge.
Well, the one thing that I learned this very early on from my mother and my grandmother. Dime con quién tú andas y te digo quién tú eres. Tell me who you surround yourself with, and I'll tell you who you are. I have been very blessed and fortunate to be surrounded by incredible leaders and incredible leaders in all arenas. So when I get to the story about my becoming Secretary of State, that wasn't me. That was a community behind me saying, ya es tiempo. And I wasn't the first to deserve it. And I wasn't the first that should have gotten it. But I was just the first that had the opportunity and the timing to have it, you know. And I think about, I don't want to get political, but I think about Justice LaSalle, who we lost as the greatest the judge, the head of New York State Court. And it was timing, right? The Latino community and the Puerto Rican community were obviously not galvanizing enough to make that possible. So even though I was Secretary of State, it really was about who was around me, who promoted me, and who made it possible, and who gave me the platform. And then, you know, I have a dear friend who I love, who's been very instrumental in many of these ascents that I have had, was Roberto Ramirez and Luis Miranda. And, you know, Roberto used to always say, no, I can get you a job. Your job is to keep the job. So you've got to go in there with excellence and really make it. And was one of the things he would always say, not as much to me, but I knew that was sort of the undercurrent. And Luis Miranda, who has always been, you know, an advocate and a supporter. So, I mean, I've been very, very fortunate, you know, and I come from good stock, man. I come from Puerto Rican women from El Barrio. Can't get any stronger than that.
Punto.
You're right.
So, family grew up in El Barrio. Were you familiar with the Young Lords? Like, was your family involved?
Yeah. You know, we weren't involved.
Okay.
You know, we my family, my grandmother admired what they were doing. She didn't admire some of the approaches. And so that influenced a lot. I loved what they were doing, and I attended a lot of meetings and gatherings, but I was never a Young Lord. That was not part of my pathway. And I think when I think of really breakthrough individuals, they did, and the example that I think that they did was such elegance, and that taught us that it's not just an act, but it's the thought of what you want in the long term. Because taking over Lincoln Hospital was great, but what they did was that they changed health policies. They came up with a public health approach. They came up with a patient's bill of rights. So they had there was a whole systemic change, and that's what they always promoted. The act itself, that was brilliant, the way they got out. And I remember when seeing the documentary that they all wore, so many of them wore, blended in with the employees of the hospital so that they could leave the hospital before the police came in. It was brilliant strategy, but it was always about leaving a legacy, building, changing systems, and that's what they did.
And for those who don't know, the Young Lords, would you consider them a political party?
No, they were an activist group. They were not a political party. As a matter of fact, they would challenge political systems. They were in the sense that they had a political strategy, and they had a political perspective, which was self-determination and independence.
Yes.
And that you determine what's right for you, that you do not have it being dictated by others. So in that sense, you would say, yeah, but it wasn't a political party as we know a political party. But it was definitely the best kind of thinking around political activism.
Yes, they were. Would you compare them to the Black Panthers?
very much so.
Yes.
And so did they. So did they.
Yes. So that's who the Young Lords were. They were very prominent in New York within the Latino community, specifically Puerto Ricans.
Primarily Puerto Ricans,
Yeah.
because that was the primary population at the time.
Right.
There was, like few of us, there was some Dominicans, but primarily it was the Puerto Rican population.
Yes, and they did change a lot of systemic programming, like taking over Lincoln Hospital. They also
Started after school programs.
They did amazing community-driven work that really changed the scene for a lot of Latinos. And like with any organization that is focused on breaking barriers and setting a new set of rules, they had to break some rules too. So
they broke a lot of rules.
Yes,
but they always were wide-eyed about why they were breaking that rule. And I think one of the other things that they did, which was, so wonderful for those of us who were in that generation of that time, they really made a connection to Puerto Rico. They taught you about, how we were a colonized people in Puerto Rico. So there was always un enlace and a relationship to who you are today, why you are being this way today. So it was always historical context, but also with a political activism view of what the future should be and could be for us.
Yeah. And they shut shit down.
They did.
They stormed the Capitol.
They did.
With Lolita Raibo.
Well, no, that was before them.
Oh, that was before them?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
No, the if you're going to talk about Los Héroes, that was Albizu Campo.
Oh.
He was the Independence Party of Puerto Rico.
Okay.
And man was genius. He was educated in Harvard, and he was an incredible statesman, and was real clear that every people have the right to be free, and every nation has the right to be a sovereign nation. So it was that Independence Party that took, never stormed the Capitol. So I was very upset when I think it was the New York Times recently compared it to January 6th. Very, very different course of events. This was about Puerto Ricans and their independence and their right to self-determination. And but they didn't storm the Capitol in the same possible way. And they also, did some work around Blair House, which is the vice president's dwelling. So same kind of philosophy, which you have the right. You have independent rights, and you have the right to self-determination. Different era, different times, and different means.
Yeah. For those of you who are not familiar with the Young Lords, definitely encourage you to check them out. I actually went to a museum. I think it was the New York Museum.
Yes.
And they had a beautiful spread, and I felt so.
There's also a documentary that you may want to see. There's a wonderful documentary on the Young Lords that gives you a good perspective as to why they did what they did, and what was going on in the times that really propelled them to lift up their voice and be unflinching and unapologetic about it. When you think about leadership, Victoria, that's one of the things you have to make choices. Everything in life is cause and effect, right? And if you really have a philosophy and a belief, you decided to do this. It's unflinching. It's unapologetic. You go there, you do it, and you keep moving to what your North Star is. And they were very much like that. And they were unapologetic about some of the positions that they took, some of the strategies they had to use, because the times called for nothing less than that.
Check it out, guys. It's super inspiring, the story and what they were able to accomplish, especially for my Boricuas who are tuning in. But all Latinos should know this history. So,
and all of us had one in our cultures. There's some in the Dominican culture. There's some in the Mexican culture. There's definitely some in Costa Rica. So all of us have our folks who stood up and said, "Basta ya."
Enough is enough. Let's go. We're taking over here. So I want to get into your experience operating in a space where you were constantly having to influence a lot of folks who had influence, and politics can be very much like any industry, ego-driven, and you being the first Latino to hold this prestigious role, how were you able to manage the egos and able to manage the behind the scenes of what goes into being a political figure and mobilizing people and creating buy-in and that kind of stuff to move your agenda ahead?
All right, so those are three different conversations, all right? So the first one is ego. We all have ego. We all bring it, to wherever we are. Some of us bring it at different degrees to wherever we are. And you need to learn that what is it that I want to engage with you on and with and for? And then I've got to kind of like take you for who you are, ego and all. So either I work with that or I'm going to be against that. Mm-hmm. Right? And so those are decisions, and it doesn't matter. Politics is no different than the politics in the C-suite. Trust me, sometimes I think the politicians are more out there and more forthright than politics in the C-suite. But, you have to deal with that. What is your goal? People are people. We all come with that. Now, if you walk into a room and you are dominated by your ego, just know that your influence will be minimal because you're going to meet other large egos there. So large egos either learn how to dance with each other or they try to annihilate each other. And that's one of the things that you have to make a conscious decision all the time. Who am I going to be in this situation? This is an arrogant, know-nothing individual. Do I want to sit here and fight, or do I want to try to get something done with them? And they may be looking at me. This is a smart-ass, badass woman who thinks that she's going to come and tell me what to do. So like their opinion of my ego is meeting my opinion of their ego. So in that, who's going to be dominant? And I always choose to get what I want. All right. What was my goal? And not that I always have to get my way, which I would always love if the world gave me everything I wanted. Mm-hmm. But it's more about how do I manage this situation so that I can get to what was my intention with this person so that we can get there, rather than to be Clash of the Titans. That doesn't work. Only in movies, Clash of the Titans works.
So how did you learn this strategy? Like, was it years of training?
No,
okay.
A few good losses,
okay.
a few punches in the belly, a few kicks in the ass. Excuse me, can I say that here?
Yes, you can.
But you learn that, and you go and you say, okay, how do I do this differently? You go lick your wounds, mm-hmm. and you learn, and you do that. Or some of you have enough. You've got the gift of having people be in these multiple roles. So see what they've done. See what they've succeeded. When I was moving in these circles, we didn't have a lot. We didn't have a lot and particularly as women. We had Olga Mendez, Nidia came later. We had Carmen Arroyo later. There weren't a lot of models that role models that we can look to and say, oh, how does she navigate this? So, you sometimes had to do it on your own, get punched in the face, get kicked on the floor, lick your wounds, and then start all over again. But today we have so many people. I think of Latinas have so many people in C-streets and C-suites and so many different women in politics that you ask the questions. How did you do it? Where did it go? What can you tell me? I keep hitting this wall, and it's sort of like, yeah, that's the wall you created.
Okay. So the pressure, because back then there weren't many that looked like you, that were women. How did you manage that pressure? Because till this day, there are still rooms where we are the only right?
Oh,
We're the
yeah.
only woman. We're the only Latina. So how do you manage that pressure? Where did you like talk to yourself in the mirror and be like, you got this, you're gonna go kill it? Like how did you manage?
Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you go to that trusted ally and say, I'm at my wit's end. If I walk into that room one more time, I'm going to kill somebody. And that's not a good thing. Or you literally have to sometimes role play it in your head. And sometimes you get an ally. You might not know this person, but I might get someone who can then endorse you in a very subtle way to say, you know what, Victoria's not like that. Let me just tell you a little bit about her so that it kind of like takes that edge that they might have about you. Mm-hmm. So there it's this, I keep talking about it the way I talk about fundraising, these concentric circles of relationships. When do you use them? When do you tap into them? And how do you use them to reach this goal? But the most important thing, and I say this all the time to all of us and to myself all the time, what's your goal? Where are you going with this? If it's just for name recognition, if it's just for limelight, that's going to be short-lived. Mm. But if it's structural purpose and long-term, then you have a roadmap that you can follow. A marathon is a lot harder to do than a sprint. So, it takes a lot more practice and training to do that marathon.
Help us understand this a little more, because I actually struggle with this because I know so many incredible people. I'm blessed with a very vibrant network. And sometimes I think to myself, like, okay, I know all these incredible people. Like, how am I strategically either building relationships or making sure my asks make sense? What if you don't have a goal, but you know that this is someone special or someone that you want to build with, but you don't have necessarily a goal in mind or an ask, right?
But you want to like them and know them,
right? Perhaps build rapport.
So then be who you are. If you bring your authentic self